The wind clawed at the windows until the glass moaned. Inside the diner, the only light came from the dying neon sign that blinked red and blue against the snow. Sarah stood behind the counter counting what was left of her life. $47. The bills lay flat on the worn laminate, edges trembling from the draft, sneaking under the door. Beneath the drawer, the white corner of an envelope waited like a small threat. The bank's notice, 7 days before they took everything. She pushed it deeper out of sight, but the paper rasped against her cuff, as if it wanted to be remembered. The sound was sharp as a blade scraping bone. The heater coughed, rattled, and gave a tired sigh. Somewhere above, the fan ticked like a clock, too weak to keep time. Sarah poured the last of the bitter coffee into the sink. Steam rose, ghosting her glasses. She wiped them clean with the hem of her cardigan. Outside, the world was gone. Only the thick swirl of white where Highway 70 used to be. The pumps in the lot were buried to their throats. Her breath fogged the window. She traced a circle through it and looked out into nothing. Booth 4 waited in the corner, Robert's booth. The cushion still sagged where he used to sit. She ran her hand over the cracked red vinyl, feeling the ghost of him beneath her palm. "Still here?" she whispered before catching herself. Talking to empty space was a habit that made the nights too long. The register clicked shut. The sound echoed through the diner, neat and final, like a lock turning on a tune. The neon outside hummed once, then stuttered. The room dimmed. She stared at the reflection of her own tired face in the glass, framed by frost and failure. Somewhere inside her, a small voice counted the days backward. A noise rose beneath it all, faint at first, as if the storm had grown a second heart. It deepened until the spoons on the counter trembled. Not wind, not a plow, a pulse made of metal and thunder. Sarah's eyes lifted. Through the snow she saw lights, faint, yellow, moving in rhythm. One pair became 3, then 5, then too many to count. The roar thickened until it pressed against the walls. She backed from the window as the first headlights cut through the storm, long cones of light slicing into the diner's dim interior. 15 of them, she realized, 15 heavy motorcycles crawling up the drive, chrome dulled by ice, engines groaning against the cold. The sound filled the world, steady and mechanical, the breathing of beasts. Sarah's throat went dry. Stories she had heard about men in leather and patches flickered in her mind. She reached for the light switch. Her hand hovered. She could kill the lights. Pretend she wasn't here. They would move on. They had to. Then one of them dismounted. He was taller than the rest, broad-shouldered, his gait uneven. A limp that said pain had become familiar. He turned toward the diner, face hidden behind frost. The others waited, still as statues, the white wings of their breath rising around them. The man reached the porch. His gloved hand hovered over the handle but did not touch. He looked through the glass directly at her. Even from that distance she could see his eyes. Gray, cold, but not cruel. He knocked 3 times. Not hard, but with purpose. The sound sank through the door into her chest. For a long second, she could only hear her own heartbeat. Robert's voice flickered in memory. "We'll make it a light for travelers. Baby, a home away from home." She drew a breath that burned her lungs and turned the lock. The storm shoved the door open. Wind and snow tore through the room. The cold hit like a slap. She gasped, blinking against the sudden sting of ice. The man stood on the threshold covered in frost. His beard turned white, jacket stiff as armor. Behind him, shape loomed. 15 riders dismounting, faces hidden behind helmets and scarves. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough from the cold and years of smoke, "we've been on the road 12 hours. The highway's closed. We can't go any farther. We've got cash for food and coffee if you'll let us stay warm a while." Sarah looked past him to the storm. The snow was thick as fog, the highway was gone. Behind the man, the other riders waited without speaking. Their shoulders bowed under the weight of exhaustion. They didn't push forward. They didn't shout. They simply stood, shivering, waiting for her answer. Her mind told her to close the door, to lock it, to call someone. But her heart saw something else. Men caught in a storm they couldn't outdrive. She thought of Robert again, of the nights he used to radio stranded truckers, guiding them here for hot coffee and shelter. She thought of the $47 in the till, the letter waiting like a coffin nail. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. The words were simple, but they steadied her. The tall man nodded once, relief softening his face. "Thank you. You've no idea what that means." The wind followed them in, trailing snow that hissed on the heater vents. Boots stomped, leather creaked. The smell of cold metal and gasoline filled the air, sharp, but somehow comforting. The riders moved carefully, ducking under the low lights, shaking ice from their jackets. One of them, a hulking man with a mohawk, held the door open for a younger one whose hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his helmet. Sarah watched them take their seats as if afraid the vision might vanish. The booths that had been empty all week were suddenly alive with movement. The youngest rider slid into the stool nearest the window, face pale, lips blue. An older man placed a gloved hand on his shoulder, steadying him. She went behind the counter, fingers already reaching for the familiar rhythm of work. Mugs came down from their hooks. The coffee machine hissed. The smell began to fill the air again. Dark, rich, steady. "Sugar and cream are on the counter," she said. "Help yourselves." The leader, his beard now dripping meltwater, removed his gloves and nodded. "Appreciate it, ma'am." As she poured, the mug handles warmed under her fingers. The men wrapped their hands around them, eyes closing for a moment as heat seeped back into their bones. For a second, she saw not outlaws, not patches or scars, but travelers thawing in the light. The leader took a sip, eyes lifting to meet hers. "Storm's bad," he said quietly. "Worse than I've seen," she replied. He nodded. A pause stretched between them, filled by the hum of the heater and the faint clatter of spoons. Then his gaze shifted. It landed on the register, on the corner of white just barely visible where she'd pushed the bank notice out of sight. His eyes flicked to hers, quick, sharp, understanding, before sliding away as if he hadn't seen a thing. Her hand moved automatically, covering the drawer. The gesture felt naked, clumsy. She busied herself with the coffee pot, refilling cups that were still half full. He didn't mention it. He simply drank and watched the window, the storm reflecting in his eyes. The youngest rider sneezed into his sleeve. Someone passed him a napkin without looking up. Leather squeaked against vinyl. Snow melted into small rivers under their boots. The room grew warmer, the air thick, with the smell of caffeine and thawing leather. Sarah felt her shoulders drop. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape, less like a threat, more like a test. She looked at the clock above the machine, 8:20. The hand ticked with mechanical patience, uncaring. Outside, 15 bikes sat in the lot, engines cooling, snow piling soft over chrome. Inside, 15 mugs steamed. The heater rumbled, fighting to keep up. She wiped the counter with a damp rag and caught her reflection again in the chrome of the coffee urn. Pale, lined, tired, but still there. When she looked up, the leader was still watching her, calm and unreadable. There was no menace in his gaze, only a kind of quiet recognition, as if he'd seen the same edge of ruin before and knew its taste. The neon outside blinked again. One last breath before holding steady. Wind pressed against the door, trying to re-enter. but the latch held firm. The diner hummed softly, alive in the storm's throat. For the first time all winter, Sarah felt something faint but real. The sense that this night, dangerous and strange as it was, might not end in loss. She moved to the far booth, checked the salt shakers, wiped away a ring of melted snow. The tall man rose from his stool, stepped closer to the counter, and extended a hand. "Name's Jake," he said. "We'll try not to be any trouble." His handshake was firm, not crushing. Warmth transferred between them. "Unexpected, Sarah," she replied. "Good place you've got here." "Sarah used to be," she said before she could stop herself. He gave a half smile, eyes flicking once more toward the register, then back to her. "Still is." She didn't know why, but she believed him. The clock struck 8:25. Snow kept falling. Somewhere beneath the sound of the wind and the creak of leather, something quieter began to stir. A shift neither of them named. 7 days before foreclosure, 15 strangers had walked out of the storm and into her life. If justice stories are your thing, hit subscribe. We dive in now. The diner had settled into a cautious quiet, the kind that came only after chaos. The storm still pressed at the windows, but its roar had softened into a muffled breathing. The 15 men sat scattered through the room, their jackets steaming, their mugs half empty. Sarah moved among them with the easy rhythm of habit, though her heart hadn't yet slowed. She caught the leader's eyes as he watched her from the counter. Jake, he had said his name was. He sat still, large hands wrapped around a cup, the heat rising through his fingers. He didn't fidget like the others. He simply observed, the kind of man who could wait out a war without blinking. Sarah filled the pot again. The smell of fresh coffee spread like courage through the air. When she set it beside him, Jake nodded his thanks and took a slow sip. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "Been that way for 2 years now," she said. "Since Robert passed." He looked up. "Your husband?" She nodded. "Cancer." The word landed flat between them, a weight neither of them wanted to touch. Jake's gaze flicked to the corner booth. Booth number 4. A smile ghosted across her lips. "That's the one." He used to say every storm brought a story with it. Jake tilted his head slightly. Did he like storms? Sarah glanced instinctively at the empty booth, the shadow of memory sitting there. He loved them, said they showed who was family and who was just passing through. Jake considered that, the faintest spark of understanding in his eyes. Sounds like a man who knew the road. He was a trucker. He built this place for people who needed a warm meal and someone to listen. Jake nodded. Seems he built it for more than that. She didn't ask what he meant. Instead, she reached for another mug and filled it. The routine steadied her, though her hands shook slightly when she set the pot back down. The heater clicked again, humming against the cold. Outside, the snow still fell, thick as wool. "Storm's not letting up," she said quietly. "No," Jake answered. "It'll bury the road by midnight." He rose from his stool then, sliding on his gloves with a practiced motion. "Excuse me for a minute." Sarah turned toward him. "You going out there again?" "It's freezing. Just need to make a call," he said. Through the glass, she watched him step into the storm. The snow caught in his beard, the light from the diner painting a faint halo around him. He pulled a phone from his pocket, held it close to his mouth, and began to speak. His head was bowed, his breath curling in the air. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't pleading. He was issuing a command. He wasn't cursing. He was calling in something larger than the storm. He wasn't just a rider. He was a man with reach. He wasn't asking for help. He was lighting the network. The bank's clock wouldn't see it coming. Jake had just set something in motion. Inside, the men talked quietly among themselves. Marcus, the one with arms like bridge cables, leaned toward the sleeping boy at the counter and adjusted the jacket covering his shoulders. "Kid's worn out," Marcus said. Sarah smiled faintly. "Danny." Right. Yeah, he's green. First winter ride. He'll toughen up, Marcus chuckled. We all did. Or we didn't last. The mohawk-haired man at the far booth laughed. Speak for yourself. Old man. Sarah's lips curved, but her eyes returned to the window. Jake was still pacing, the storm swirling around him. The light from the neon sign flickered across his back. When he came back inside, the air shifted with him. He brushed snow from his jacket and took his seat again. Calm. Steady. Everything all right? She asked. He nodded. All set. For what? He looked at her then, the corners of his mouth tightening into a small, private smile. For settling accounts. Ma'am. The words were simple, but they landed like a stone in water, sending ripples through her chest. She pretended not to notice. Coffee's getting cold, she said, refilling his cup. He took a sip. Best I've had in months. Because it's the only one that's hot, she said with a small laugh. He smiled, but his eyes carried a thought she couldn't name. The radio crackled suddenly, startling them both. A burst of static. Then a faint voice filtered through. Highway 70. Visibility 0. All units shelter until sunrise. Jake looked toward the sound. That settles that. We're not going anywhere. Looks like you're staying till morning. He nodded. You got food for that long? Sarah hesitated. A few cans of soup, maybe some bread. Nothing fancy. Soup sounds perfect, he said. We'll pay for it. You don't need to do that, she said quickly. It's not much. Doesn't matter. We pay our way. Sarah. Always. Her hand brushed the cash register. She felt the weight of the $47 inside, and the letter underneath it. The same thought returned. 7 days. The word echoed like a slow heartbeat. I can't charge you for soup cans, she murmured. Jake slid a few bills across the counter anyway. The edges were damp, the ink smudged. Consider it respect. She didn't argue further. Instead, she turned to the back pantry, found the cans, and lit the small burner behind the counter. Soon the smell of salt and onion filled the diner. The men stirred at the scent, lifting their heads, their eyes grateful. She ladled the soup into chipped bowls and passed them out. The act steadied her nerves. Feeding people always had. Jake took his bowl last. You make it yourself. Store brand special, she said. He smiled. Tastes better than any meal I've paid for. She shook her head, but the warmth in his voice stayed with her. When they'd eaten, the room quieted again. Danny slept with his head on his arm. Marcus, sitting beside him like a silent guardian. Pete shuffled a deck of worn cards. Someone laughed softly at nothing. The storm outside softened to a whisper. Sarah leaned against the counter, her back aching, but her heart calmer than it had been in weeks. Jake's phone buzzed once. He glanced at it, thumbed the screen, then turned it face down on the counter. Bad news, she asked. He shook his head. Good news. It's working. What's working? Patience, he said simply. Her brow furrowed. You're a strange man. Jake, I've been called worse. He stood and stretched, the leather of his jacket creaking. You should get some rest. We'll keep watch. She laughed softly. I don't think I could sleep tonight. Try. You've done enough for us. The way he said it made her chest tighten. She nodded slowly and dimmed the lights over the counter, leaving only the neon glow. The pink-blue light washed over the men, softening their hard faces into something human. Good night, Jake, she said quietly. Good night, Sarah. He took his place near the window, eyes on the snow-covered lot. The others settled where they were, drifting into uneasy sleep. Behind the counter, Sarah stared at the register again. The envelope's corner caught the light like a blade. She reached out, brushed it, then pulled her hand away. Outside, Jake's phone buzzed again. A brief vibration swallowed by the wind. He read the message, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. Through the window, The storm had begun to ease. Snowflakes drifted slower now, heavier, falling like feathers instead of knives. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Tomorrow, he thought, they would start something new. The CB radio on the shelf gave a sudden sharp squeal, one hard burst that echoed through the empty diner. "Breaker," a faint voice whispered through the static, and then it was gone. Sarah didn't stir. She was already half asleep in the quiet, her head resting near the register, her hand curled beside the drawer that held her last $47. Jake looked once toward the radio, then back at the window. The faint reflection of booth 4 glimmered behind the glass, a single empty seat waiting in the half-light. He smiled to himself, a quiet promise forming in his mind. By the time the storm broke, the light would already be spreading. The storm held the diner in a tight white fist. Wind dragged its rough palm across the panes until the glass hummed. Heat tried to push back in low breaths, not enough to soften the night, only enough to keep it from settling into bone. Jackets steamed along chairbacks. Gloves lay in pairs like shed skins. Coffee cooled into clocks between refills. Sarah moved through it with the tidy economy of a person who understood what steadiness could do. She topped off cups without asking. She straightened a sugar jar whose label had faded to a pale ghost. She wiped ovals of melted snow from the floor, her rag drawing dark halos that vanished as the vents found them. Passing booth 4, she slowed and let her fingers brush the cracked red vinyl. The touch was brief, like testing a pulse. Jake watched the window, the way some men watch a horizon. He did not tap, did not fidget, did not perform patience. He sat as if stillness were a tool he had sharpened long ago. Now and then his gaze slid to the register, with its secret corner of white. He let the look move on, before witnessing became staring. When the old radio on the shelf exhaled a faint breath of static, his head tipped a fraction toward it, the way an animal turns an ear, and then went still again. The youngest rider slept folded over his arms, cheek pressed into a sleeve. His breathing carried the blunt rhythm of a machine that refuses to quit, so long as someone keeps feeding it fuel. Marcus sat near him, a sentry without ceremony, big hand cupped around a mug, as if heat might travel from ceramic to boy if both stayed in the same picture. Pete, the one with the mohawk, thumbed a deck of cards out of a pocket and bridged them back and forth, pasteboard whispering against pasteboard, not to play so much as to tell the room where its edges were. "You good there, kid?" Marcus asked without looking. A murmur answered from the boy's sleeve. Sarah slid a napkin under his elbow, so the drip of melt would not soak his shirt. The impulse felt domestic and tender, and made her throat tighten in a way the storm had not managed. In the pantry, the shelves looked like a mouth with teeth missing. 2 cans of soup, a tired bag of croutons that had drawn damp, a single jar of peaches, shining in syrup like a summer memory held behind glass. She closed the door on the peaches. With an apology she did not speak, and carried the soup to the stove. The pilot coughed awake and caught. A thin blue ring shouldered a dented pot toward boil. Salt and onion rose fast, the simple smell softening the metal edges of the room. The spoon circled and circled. The small sound steadied her pulse. "You do not have to feed us." Pete called, eyes still on the cards. "It is only soup," she said. "Only soup can be the difference," Marcus said, and lifted his mug in a quiet salute before drinking. Jake said nothing. He watched the rhythm of her stirring like a man making note of a skill. When she came with the first bowls, he waited until she had set one in front of the older men and the boy before he took one himself. The porcelain was chipped in 2 places. He did not complain. He blew once and ate like a person relearning trust in heat. Carlos wrapped both hands around his bowl and grinned into steam. "Smells like the motel my aunt ran in Albuquerque," he said. "Soup from a can, coffee, like paint, and the feeling you were safe until morning." "You talk too much," Pete said, but the corner of his mouth climbed, "only when there is something worth saying." Carlos answered, and kept warming his hands. Outside, the storm thickened its insistence rather than its noise. Snow nosed under the door, and surrendered in small rivers to the mats. The neon sign buzzed and held. A draft found a seam in an old window frame, and whistled like a kettle that might boil if given enough reasons. The radio cleared its throat, a thread of voice, stitched through static, then frayed. Sarah turned the dial a shade to the left, a shade to the right. Noise answered, then a breath of words. Someone somewhere said the word east twice, thin as a pencil line, before the weather took him back. The sound disappeared into the diner's soft hum. In the same second, Jake's phone vibrated against the counter with a small private shiver. He did not look at it. His eyes stayed on the glass, but Sarah saw the message in his stillness. The network was not asleep. It was whispering. He allowed the phone to quiet itself and left it face down, as if the truth would be there when he wanted it, and did not need his supervision to remain true. She carried bowls down the line. Thanks arrived in a dozen modest forms. A nod, a soft ma-em, a spoon lifted toward her like a tiny flag. When she straightened at the end of the counter, her hand found the cool metal of the register. The drawer sat flush, the corner of white hidden beneath it like a tooth under a lip. She set her palm flat on the drawer and pressed. The tidy click as it closed. The last fraction of an inch felt like an apology to the air. 7 days, she thought. The clock was a song she could not turn off. Jake set damp bills between them, dark from melted snow. "Consider it respect," he said. "We pay our way." "It is only soup," she said again, and knew the sentence was a veil she was holding up between herself and shame. He slid the money closer and rested 2 fingers on it for a heartbeat, not to touch her, but to keep the paper from the heater's breath. The gesture was practical and, somehow, kind. The boy woke like a person stepping back from a ledge. His hand went to his chest, found the real wall of his ribs, and stayed. "Sorry," he said to no one and everyone. "I was out." Marcus set a fresh bowl under his nose. His hand settled on the boy's shoulder, the pressure firm as a promise. "Rest is paid for. Kid, eat." The boy ate, fast at first and then careful, scraping the bottom, as if to memorize the taste of ordinary mercy. When he set the spoon down, he did it so gently the ceramic made no sound at all. Pete squared the deck and slid it into his pocket. His palms were nicked and scarred. The small act of putting the cards away felt like a room agreeing to behave. The power stuttered. The lights dipped in a shallow bow, and for a breath the diner became a cave, lit only by the idea of fire. Heat paused, gathered itself, and pushed again. The neon outside coughed and refused to die. A sound like relief moved through the room without any mouth making it. "Tell me what else you need from back there," Jake said. "From back where?" she asked without turning. "From wherever you keep what keeps people going." "There is not much to keep," she said, and named it 2 loaves, if I cut around the hard places. A few butter packets trying to be anything else. Bacon ends the supplier sent, instead of what I ordered, and I was too tired to argue. He nodded like a man reading a map he already knew. "Bring what you are willing to part with. We will make it stretch." She brought bread and butter and the wrong bacon, and the men made space, as if space were something you could share by agreeing it existed. Marcus tore toast into quarters and passed the pieces down the counter, as if taking attendance. Pete used his piece to scrape the last of his soup. The boy closed his eyes on each bite like someone listening to a song he wanted to learn by ear. Sarah saw herself in the chrome of the coffee urn, a face with the tired grace of a woman who had spent years translating hunger into manners. The pot was almost empty again. She measured grounds by feel because the scoop had gone missing months ago, and habit had become a better tool than memory. Jake rose and stepped to the window. Breath made a small cloud, and then froze thin across the pane. Outside, the bikes hunched under deepening white-black curbs, softening into patient shapes. He set his palm to the glass and left a handprint that melted frost in the outline of a large, careful hand. He studied the lot like a man counting allies, who had not yet been told they had been summoned. The room leaned toward ordinary for 3 minutes. Memory rose like wooden beads in warm water, and she let some of it surface. Robert pouring coffee without a spill. 2 old hunters in heavy coats, arguing about nothing as if it were urgent. The evening, a trucker cried quietly over a slice of pie, and thanked her without saying the reason aloud. The faith of small things held and held again. The radio found another sliver of voice. The same word came twice, east and east, and then silence. The phone on the counter answered with that same quiet shake. A second confirmation. Ping. Jake did not reach for it. He did not need to. He knew the network spoke in murmurs first. Then, engines. Beta stood. Marcus stood with him. No one spoke. They moved toward the back for a clean bucket and the big pot without being asked. They were not just fetching snow to melt. They were anchoring the place until morning. Carlos went to the door and set his shoulder into it to test the seal. Still holding, he reported, and returned to his stool. News like that lived in the same category as prayer. Sarah dried her hands and tucked the towel into her waistband, the way she had in the first year and every year since. She glanced at the register again. The letter under it sang its single note. 7 days. 7. She pushed the drawer closed a second time, palm flat and firm. The sound was neat, almost cheerful, and cruel. Jake turned from the window and studied her face, as if it were a weather report that would decide a route. He did not offer soft words. He let the respectful space between them be a kind of honesty. When he sat again, he set his cup in the circle. Its heat had left, as if claiming his place without asking for more. Pete returned with the bucket. Marcus followed with the pot. Snow heaped in the bucket like sugar. The burner took the weight, and the flame thought about it, and then agreed. Steam began its quiet work. The lights dipped once more. Reefer. Like a blink, Sarah felt the building sway inside her knees, a learned balance that kept plates from sliding. She shook the clogged salt shaker until crystals fell, a small drift forming on the laminate like a private weather that obeyed her hand. She reached for the coffee pot. The tape around its handle caught the line of her palm with gritty tack. That tiny sensation anchored her more firmly than any comforting thought. She poured the last of the pot into 3 waiting cups and set the pot back empty. "We will need more water soon," she said. "We will make it," Jake answered, as if accepting a task spoken into a radio. Sarah nodded. Practical thoughts were coats. She pulled this one on and felt a little warmer inside it. Outside, the world remained a white page, being pressed down by a heavy hand. Inside, ink made of breath and broth and coffee kept writing its other text. One steady word after another. The radio murmured and waited. The heater sang its tired song and remembered the tune. The neon refused surrender. The bikes surrendered to snow and were still themselves under it. Sarah looked again at booth 4. And did not feel the pull to sit. She lifted the ladle. The soft knock of metal on dented pot sounded like a line drawn under a sentence. The men watched without watching, the way people do when they have decided someone is capable and therefore does not need guarding every second. Jake raised his cup. To storms that show you who is family, he said. His eyes went to the register and back to her. And to debts that get paid one way or another. Heat rose from the cup between them, like a small blessing that would not last, and was no less real for that. Sarah held his gaze a heartbeat, and then another. The clock inside her tried to sing its song again. 7 days. She let it sing and kept pouring. The steam lifted, and the diner breathed with it. Steady in the palm of the storm, the night pressed its face to the glass until the panes hummed, and the neon outside blinked like a tired eyelid choosing a color to live in. Inside, heat moved in low stubborn current, shouldering around stools and under tables, just enough to keep the cold from settling in the bones of anyone who stayed still too long. Jackets steamed along chairbacks. Coffee made dark little skies in cups and cooled into clocks that asked to be wound. Sarah kept the room steady. The only way she knew, she stacked saucers with the soft clack that says not yet to the dark. She wrapped butter in its paper as if neatness could buy time. Passing booth 4, she let 2 fingers find the familiar crack in the vinyl, the place her ring used to polish smooth, and the touch steadied her like a private handhold on a ladder. Sleep prowled the edges of her, patient and heavy, the kind that follows a long worry more than a long day. She would not let it set its hand on her. She kept moving. Jake watched, without making anyone feel watched. When the old radio rustled like dry grass, his head angled half an inch, and then returned. He sat with his weight tipped forward, forearms easy on the counter, hands around the mug as if that circle of heat were a tool he meant to use. When Sarah set a plate of toast shards on the laminate, he tipped his chin once in thanks, and then turned to inventory, the weather beyond the window, and the weather within the walls at the same time. Marcus had settled against the radiator in the leftmost booth, a quiet bulk beside the iron that thunked now and then like a slow, dependable heart. One palm rested on the tabletop, fingers spread as if promising the wood it would stay. Danny, softened by soup and warmth, blinked slow at nothing and everything, the way a person does when they are measuring themselves against morning and hoping they will reach it. "Tell me," Jake said, and the word made time square its shoulders. "How long do you have?" Her mouth knew before her hands remembered steadiness. "A week," she said. A beat passed that felt like a slip on ice, and then she added, 7 days. She heard the shape of it land between them. A stone set down on a small table. The room kept on with its true sounds. The heater breathed, a spoon nicked china. Snow melt ticked from a boot sole to the mat and made a slow map. She folded a napkin once and then again, and only then let her palm come flat to the counter. Jake did not smile. He set his mug down with such finality the ceramic almost cracked, though it did not. "The clock stops," he said, "flat as iron." She did not trust the sentence. She wanted to. The wanting made her tired in a different way. She lifted her mug and drank coffee for warmth and for courage, because tonight they might be the same thing. The radio found a slit in the storm and cleared its throat. A thin word from somewhere east slipped through, and then east again, and then the weather took it back. In the same breath, the face of Jake's phone shivered against the counter, one short, silent tremor, and went still. He did not look at it. He did not need to. Sarah saw the message in the way his jaw went quiet. Somewhere off the edge of the map he had already drawn, lines were connecting themselves. Danny tried to stand and decided not to. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands, the way a much younger boy might, and left his palms there as if to warm the bones of his face. Marcus set his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Wait firm as a promise. Rest is paid for. Kid," he said, "eat when you are ready." Danny nodded without lifting his hands. The motion said the world had settled more tightly against him, and he could hold it again. Sarah stepped into the pantry and let the old hinges tell a quiet story. Cardboard took the cold in its smell. The last good loaf leaned on a heel of bread gone hard, and she cut around the stone places, without naming them waste. Bacon ends went to sizzle, turning scent into hunger, and hunger into food, and food into memory. On the back shelf, the jar of peaches held a summer under glass. She touched the lid with 2 fingers and left it there. Not tonight. When she came back, Pete and Marcus had returned with a clean bucket of snow and the big pot. No words had been exchanged, and yet something had been decided. The flame took the metal, steam rose not quickly but surely, like a letter going to be written neatly no matter how tired the hand. "You have done this before," Jake said, letting the first sentence pass and then catching the second. "Run out," she said, "or make not enough turn into enough." "Both," he answered without judgment, setting the word down where it could hold. He turned his wrist to warm the underside at the mug, and the cuff of his jacket shifted. The pale square of his phone woke of its own mind and showed a bar of numbers that meant time rather than a person. Sarah did not look full on. Her eye held the mark the way a palm holds the warmth of a cup it has put down. 2013. And then sleep again. The radio hissed a needle prick at the same moment, a confirmation she felt along her scalp. Jake laid his palm over the device, not to claim it but to steady it, as if even that small movement might disturb the careful gravity here. She plated bacon, and let each plate find a hand without a voice. She poured coffee for herself, and leaned a hip to the counter long enough to taste what she gave others. Salt and fat and comfort. The coffee left heat in her throat, and reminded her that warmth travels faster when someone watches to be sure it arrives. "How far back is the closure?" she asked, letting speech move air to new corners. "Far enough that a person would be unwise to test it," he said. He drank and set the cup down so softly it made no sound. "If the plows try before morning, they will regret their ambition." Plain talk comforted her and did not lighten her hands. They had already returned to work. Pete broke toast into quarters and passed the pieces along, like a man taking attendance with respect. Carlos tipped his plate so an edge slid into Danny's reach, and Danny ate in small bites until the inside of his mouth remembered how to welcome heat without flinching. The radio opened its throat wider. A number barked out of static, lost and returned as a tone more than a figure, a shape of certainty without the detail. Jake's phone answered with a second quiet tremor. Sarah felt the notch of it along her ribs. 3 calls. She thought without meaning to make words. 3 lights. 3 answers he was not taking. The storm was a waiting room. "Your husband built this," Jake said without looking at booth 4 and still speaking to it. "He did," Sarah said, "out of a dream and a stubborn streak and wrong parts that fit once he was done with them. He must have had good hands," Jake said. "He did. And he liked storms because they told the truth about people." Jake looked to the empty booth and back to her. "Sometimes they tell you which debts are worth paying," he said, low and even, "the kind that cost nothing but time." Danny stood this time. He reached for the pot, checked the room with his eyes to see if a hand would stop him, and when none did he poured without a spill. Marcus watched, not hovering, prepared to catch a plate if gravity turned rude. It did not. A thin line of pride drew across the boy's mouth and stayed at the register. The white corner of the letter waited like a tooth. Sarah closed the drawer. The last short click, and the sound rang in her head louder than any engine. She did not pull the letter out. She set her hand flat and let the pressure quiet. The singing of it, 7 days, The clock was a song she could not turn off, but her palm could muffle it. "We will not be gone by morning if the road does not allow it," Jake said toward the window, giving her the dignity of his profile instead of the full weight of his gaze. "We will not leave you worse than you found us." The sentence fit her like a coat she had not been sized for. She nodded because nodding was the measure of what she could carry. The pot rolled into a steady talk. Steam walked the shelf above and made soft shapes out of hard objects. Sarah ladled hot water into the machine and watched the dark thread pour, as if drawing a line against quitting. The tape on the coffee pot handle bit her palm with a tacky grit that anchored her more honestly than any gentle word. A gust shouldered the door and rattled the bell without opening it. The room looked up as one body and then back down, a flock accepting the wind and returning to the work of staying warm. Marcus fed a scoop of snow to the pot. Pete folded a towel and laid it by the mats where melt made small rivers that did not care about banks. Jake's phone woke again on its own and burned a new line. Sarah saw it sideways, the way you watch lightning and listen for the count. 2027. He did not reach. He let it die and tapped a knuckle once against the counter. Not a code, only a man marking a moment for himself. The radio answered with a breath, and then kept its manners. "You could sleep an hour," he said, and the almost humor in the words made the offer sound like something he would insist upon if asked twice. "We will be here when you open your eyes." An hour would turn into morning, she said, and I would dream the bank took the mugs and left me the spoons. "We have seen stranger collection," Pete called, laughing under the words. "A man once hauled a bathtub on a tiny bar from Winslow to Phoenix, and still owes us the reason why." The room chuckled in small pockets. Danny's laugh started late and stayed as if he were saving a part for later. The phone woke a third time. The screen threw a pale shape, and the numbers drew themselves like a small verdict. 21:02. Jake looked at the dead phone and then at the clock on the wall. He did not move. The radio stayed quiet, respectful of what had already been decided somewhere else. Sarah stood very straight. Her hand settled on the drawer. For the first time, she did not hide the letter with her palm. She covered the stack of $47 instead. The thin life of the place, warm under her skin. She felt the weight of paper that could leave, and paper that could not, and chose which one to guard. Jake lifted his mug. "To storms that show you who is family," he said, the words made for this room and no other. His eyes met hers and did not flinch. "And to debts that get paid one way or another." Steam rose between them like proof of work. The clock inside her kept singing 7 days. She let it sing and kept pouring. Outside, the night pressed harder. Inside, the diner breathed in time with the ladle, a steady rise and fall, as if waiting had muscles and they were growing stronger. 21:02. Jake thought without speaking it. The network was lit. Morning would not belong to the bank. The storm kept sanding the world down to one color, as if it meant to smooth every edge until nothing could catch. Inside, the diner held its line. Heat moved in low, stubborn currents. Steam penned soft ghosts along the stainless rim of the soup pot, and jackets steamed on chairbacks, like small weather systems deciding to be kind. The radio watched them from its shelf with a dim green eye. The cash drawer under Sarah's palm held a paper warmth that belonged to breath and not to numbers. She let her hand rest there a heartbeat longer, then reached for the ladle and sent circles through broth that smelled of onion and salt and staying. Marcus watched snow surrender in the bucket and become water, then steam. He did not rush it. He had the stillness of someone who knew the worth of letting a thing become what it was trying to be. When Sarah slid him a plate where bread had been coaxed back to tenderness with heat and butter, He nodded once and pushed it toward the edge of the table so the boy could reach it without standing. The boy murmured thanks, trying not to look grateful and failing. Marcus pretended not to notice. He lifted his mug with a hand that made the ceramic look like a toy and drank slow. Jake kept the window. He had chosen that watch and would not be moved from it. Now and then his breath found the glass and grew a thin milk flower of frost. He rubbed the heel of his hand across the pane and left an oval of clean night. Outside, the bikes hunched under white chrome turned to bone, power asleep. Pete dealt a single card to no one and slid it back into the deck, then bridged the pasteboards until they sighed. Carlos leaned the way men do when a stool seems built around them and cupped his bowl, breathing onion and salt as if cataloging a blessing. Sarah moved as if order had chosen her body to live in. When she passed booth 4, her fingertips skimmed the cracked vinyl where a ring used to polish smooth, and the absent metal wrote its small ache into her hand. She did not linger there. The soup pot exhaled, and she followed that domestic breath back to the counter. The boy finished his toast and sat taller, as if fuel had remembered his spine. He glanced at the window, then down. Words worked behind his teeth, like someone else had left them there, and they now asked to be carried. Marcus turned just enough to give him the whole of his attention without the weight of it. The boy cleared his throat. His first sound came thin and then steadied. "I was here once," he said, like a confession. Sarah looked up from the pot. The room gave itself toward him without leaning in. Everyone pretended to go on doing what they were doing, and did not. "I did not have money," the boy said. "I had a motorcycle that sounded like a pocket full of screws, and a head like a bad day you could not shake off. She did not just feed me. She gave me a number for a man in Salt Lake. She gave me back my future when I had only $5. And a bad day." He touched the counter as if the wood might keep the memory safe for him when he forgot it. A face rose in Sarah's muddled drawer of memory and wavered into focus. Hollow eyes, a jaw clenched hard against giving up, a bike held together by hope and wire. She kept stirring, because motion lets a story stay. Carlos lifted his chin in a small offering. "My girl rolled a car outside Denver," he said, voice like sand and smoke. "I stopped here with hands shaking so bad I could not make the phone help me. She called the hospital for me, drew me a map that cut 20 minutes I did not have, and packed a sandwich I did not taste until the parking lot. The girl is fine now. She drives slow as a priest." He smiled into his bowl and shook his head as if to dislodge a blessing and kept it. Pete inhaled through his teeth, like a sharp thing had taught him how to hold it. "My bike died in a storm that had opinions," he said. "She put a plate in front of me, and that man of hers found a wrench, like a pastor finds a verse. Would not take money for parts, like they were trading with the road itself." The radio woke a fraction, a low approval like a cat's throat, then settled. Jake's phone did not light. It did not need to. The room could feel the network the way you feel a storm's pressure in your ears. Even after the wind goes quiet, Marcus had been quiet longer than was natural for him. He wiped his palm across the table, as if to clear crumbs, and instead cleared years, then tilted his head. "I know your face," he said, and certainty made Sarah's mouth go dry. His eyes narrowed as if adjusting a lens until a picture clicked. He snapped his fingers. The sound went through the room like a stamp hitting paper. "Tommy," he said. "Tommy Patterson, Western Mountain Transport. Bigman, Redbeard." A night with a fist in his chest that would not unclench. The memory came up like a figure breaking a surface clean. Rockfall east of the bend. Radio chatter cut off. A truck wrong under a sick sky. An ambulance trapped. Her own hands on a wheel. A sick man's hand crushing hers on a bench while she sat still because fear is a thing You do not serve back with the food you just gave. The shape of his freckles, the way hope had to be spoken into the room in an ordinary voice. She set the ladle on the trivet and held the counter with both hands, not because she was falling, but because the body likes proof. I remember him, she said, so many winters ago. He had freckles where the sun was kinder than the job. Marcus's grin rose like sunrise under cloud. He married my sister, he said. He tells that story so much, you cannot eat a hot dog at our house without hearing it ruined by heroics. The laugh that followed was small and honest. Even the radio seemed to smile. The heater thunked like a boot on a porch. Jake had let the stories stand on their own legs. Now he turned from the window like a man who had taken a picture into his head and trusted it to stay there. He looked at Sarah, the way a carpenter looks at a beam he has just tested and found sound. The tension in the room lowered a note. He had not needed proof. He had wanted the men to hear themselves say it. The door shivered on its hinges. Not wind, purpose. Through the oval of clear glass Jake had rubbed, a pair of headlights slid down the short drive and stopped with the steadiness of a held breath. Sarah felt every man notice without turning. The sound they did not make could have been a cheer. They stayed seated. No one taught the rules of this place. The walls had learned them, and the men obeyed by instinct. Jake rose because he was the door. When a door needed to be a person, he opened it the width of a shoulder and let the cold speak first. Wind carried a man inside almost before he stepped, broad shoulders, beard the color of rust laced with snow. His laugh came ahead of him and cut itself short when the warmth slapped his face. He was older than the night she remembered and exactly himself. Sarah Williams, he boomed. Vowels you could hold. Angel of Highway 70. She did not step forward or back. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and wrapped her in an embrace that lifted her an inch clean off the floor. He smelled of cold iron and engine oil, and whatever New Hope smells like. Her ribs protested and then stood down. He set her on her feet and rested his hands on her shoulders, a polite moment more before letting go. I have been waiting years, he said, words trying to climb over each other. Years. I tell that story to anyone who will stand still, and half who will not. He looked at the men and then back at her. Could not stand the thought you might need a thing I could give, and I would not be there to hand it. Heat stung her eyes. She hated it and did not block it. Habit brought her hand to the counter. Courtesy found her voice. Tommy, she said, and the name steadied the room. The night was bad. Anyone would have done what I did. No, he said, and shook his head with the clean conviction of a man who knows what he owes and will not let you trim it smaller. Anyone would not have. You were the porch light. You were the open door. You were the one who stayed. Marcus cleared his throat like a starter's pistol and grinned as if winning an argument he had staged for years. Pete leaned back on 2 chair legs and whistled the kind of note that means a balance has found a new number. Carlos shook his head like a man trying to dislodge a pleasant surprise and failing on purpose. Jake did not step into it. He had arranged the music and let it play. He came to the counter only when Tommy pulled a folded slip of heavy paper from his wallet and laid it face up like a card in a game no one else knew they were playing. A business card, edges gone soft from years close to a body. He kept a thumb on it to stop a draft from taking it, carried it more than a decade, he said, and looked almost ashamed at naming time as if it were a dog he had spoiled. He cleared his throat, carried it long, thought I might hand it back and have it mean what it meant to me. He met Sarah's eyes. It means the road does not take everything. Sometimes it brings you back to the same door with better hands. Something unclenched at the base of her throat. It was not relief. Relief belongs to endings. This was a beginning, remembering where to begin. The radio chose that moment to live, Its voice swam up and steadied, words as clear as a blade. Breaker 1N to Midnight Haven, rolling in from the west. Over. The heater answered with a satisfied thunk. Jake's mouth moved toward a smile and refused one. He did not touch his phone. He did not need to. His calls had already turned to motion. Tommy took a stool and captured a mug before Sarah could reach for the pot. She poured anyway and watched steam lift into his beard. He blew across the rim like greeting an old habit. "Thought I would beat the next crowd," he said, eyes creasing. "And then I remembered who I called." He tipped his chin toward Jake. "Respect and affection braided clean. You light one wick with this one, and the whole row goes." Sarah's eyes went to the window on their own. Night held the oval Jake had cleared. The rest had fogged again, as if breath wanted privacy. She could see the faint tilt of his shoulders in the glass, the patience of someone who had made calls and was now letting answers arrive. She set a plate of bacon ends and a slice of bread in front of Tommy. He looked at it the way men look at a flag they have fought under, then took a bite with the attention of a new lover, and closed his eyes to file the taste where it would be safe. The boy watched with his mouth half open and shut it with a click. Caught. Tommy saw and pushed the plate 2 inches his way. "Share if I look like a man who deserves to," he said. The boy took a piece larger than courtesy would advise, and no one corrected him. Marcus made a sound in his chest that meant permission and pride at once. Outside, the storm kept trying to be the only thing in the world. A new sound threaded it now, more felt than heard. Then, so present the floor, learned its syllable. Not a hum, a thick thrumming that found the chest and wrote a second heartbeat there. The men did not stand. They did not need to. A rider feels presence in his teeth. Headlights cut through the window like a blade through cloth. Another followed. Then a chain. White light washed the room and withdrew. Washed and withdrew. The panes flashing white and white and white again. The bell over the door rattled hard on its spring. A frantic applause that made every spoon sing. Sarah did not move. She set her hand over the small warm stack in the drawer and felt old wood under her palm. The same grain she had polished with rags and seasons and staying. Jake lifted his cup so the ceramic warmed his lip. "To lights that stay on," he said. "Too low to carry beyond the counter and exactly far enough." Engines layered the night until the windows flashed white and went dark and flashed again, like lightning that had decided to stay. The bell over the door rattled itself hoarse and then held its tongue. Heat kept its small ground inside, shouldering around boots and chair legs, while the floor took on a steady tremor that rose into ribs and settled there like a second heartbeat. Sarah stayed at the counter with the ladle, the dented rim knocking a neat period at the end of fear each time she dipped. She did not count bowls. Counting belonged to banks and receipts. She counted steam, circles of cups on laminate, the soft sound people make when warmth finds their hands. The cash drawer breathed under her palm whenever she passed it. The white corner of the letter waited like a small tooth. Her hand found the stack by reflex, and then left it alone, as if the body had learned which paper needed guarding and which did not. At the door, Jake became a hinge. He did not raise his voice. He drew maps with 2 fingers. A flat palm sent 3 riders to the back row of booths. A tilt of his chin turned a pickup so a plow could nose in. When someone began speaking too loud, the air around him changed, and the volume fell without anyone being told. He arranged the room the way a river arranges stones until the current knows itself. They kept arriving the way a promise keeps arriving, not in a rush but in a line, boots stamped on one mat, and not everywhere. Snow slid from leather shoulders and was coaxed by towels into obedient streams. Patches named places at the edge of Sarah's knowledge. Oakland, Salt Lake, a chapter whose letters she had never seen together before. None of it mattered more than faces, windburned, tired, relieved, eyes that had spent hours squinting into white and were now trying to widen. Marcus anchored a lane near the radiator with a body that made path feel like design. Pete became a towel in motion, catching melt before it thought of being a hazard. Carlos slid a stool with his foot so a woman could be taller again while she thawed. Danny learned the exact pour that kept coffee filters from collapsing and wore the serious joy of someone entrusted with something that mattered. The radio found its clear voice for the first time all night and cut through the metal hum like a blade. Breaker 1N to Midnight Haven, rolling in from the west. Staggered lines. Keep the lane clear. Over. The sentence put a spine in the air. Sarah did not know the code and did not need to. The meaning moved like steam. A man in a torn jacket drifted toward the register, with the cautious guilt of someone who does not want to take without paying. Before he could set down the wadded bills he had crushed in his fist, Jake laid a palm on the counter, light and sure, not warning, not command, a promise that there would be a reckoning, and that it would be fair. The man's shoulders loosened. He took his soup and sat down with the relief of someone invited. Sarah slid bowls across the slick and felt the shift in herself as surely as the floor's tremor. The drawer called. The letter hummed its thin song. She set the ladle down for one breath and looked. The white corner waited. She did not touch it. Her palm hovered over the $47, felt the small, warm life of paper that could leave, and withdrew. She picked the ladle back up. Work was the measure. The room had chosen her for that, not the bank. Outside, headlights stroked the glass in quick white curtains that left the panes humming. Inside, leather thaw and damp wool and road salt joined onion and coffee until the air smelled like persevering. A woman with a braid shook the last ice from it and gathered the shards on a napkin, carrying them to the sink like an offering. A kid barely past boyhood warmed his gloves on the heater, then put them on and carried a tray with a professional care that made Sarah want to bless his parents in absentia. Tommy drifted back to the window, a man who needed to see arrival with his own eyes to believe it. He tipped his chin toward Jake with a grin that made something younger show through the beard. "You light one wick with this one, and the whole row goes," he said, and Sarah followed his glance without meaning to. In the oval, Jake had wiped clear. She caught the set of his shoulders, the patience of a man who had made calls and was standing for the answers. The bell clattered into a laugh and then gave way as another wave shouldered in. The floorboards tuned themselves to a deep, even thrum, and held there. Marcus broke toast into quarters and took attendance with quiet gestures. Pete folded towels into a neat stack as if neatness itself were a way to keep the storm out. Carlos had learned the names of strangers and used them already as if they had always been in his mouth. Booth 4 held its peaceful gravity in the corner, and for once Sarah felt it with gratitude and not ache. She moved past it without stopping, set down more bowls, took up more mugs, and let the small rituals line up like stones you can cross a river on. The radio's green eye brightened, and the voice returned, firm now, as if distance had shortened. Midnight Haven. The voice said, steady as the road should be and was not. You are the light, holding here until morning, over and out. The sentence landed in the room with the weight of a truth that had been true for years and had only now been named aloud. For one beat, Sarah could not see the counter for the heat in her eyes. She blinked it back because boiling pots need eyes more than pride does. She steadied the ladle and felt her ribs lift in the way they used to when Robert would step in behind the counter and take the second pot without asking, hands already knowing where everything lived. New faces bent over bowls and lifted spoons. A laugh rose and sank. Somewhere near the door, a small argument about road conditions turned into a different story about a blown tire and the kindness of a stranger. Spoons ticked rims, the heater thunked approval. The bell, worn out from gladness, clicked politely when a latecomer slipped inside and shut the wind out of habit rather than heroics. Someone else approached the register, cash held like apology. Jake was there before hesitation turned into insistence. His palm found the laminate again with that light, certain touch. We settled together, his posture said. His brow did not lift. His mouth did not move. The promise was in the way he had already arranged the room. Sarah felt the weight leave her chest in a measured ounce. The bank counted in thousands and late fees. The men in her diner were counting in bowls and minutes and miles and duty. Her ledger had found its language. Outside, the thrum of engines eased down an octave, not dying but settling into a long, patient hum, as if the night itself had learned to breathe slower. A plow idled somewhere off stage and then cut its engine out of respect. Snow tapped the glass in a softer hand. The neon sign outside held its color steady, like a small brave thing keeping its feet through a count. She cleaned the counter in a slow line with the towel, and realized her hand had not strayed toward the drawer in 10 minutes. The thought surprised her, and then did not. People were warm. Bowls were emptying and filling. Work had a shape she understood. The letter could not find her in that shape. Jake drifted back to the counter and lifted his mug. He let the heat write itself into his lip. He said nothing grand. He stood where the cold met the warm, and held the line, ready for the next thing that wanted to cross. The radio quieted. The men's voices braided into a low river that spoke its peace to the stones. The bell rested on its spring like a bird on a wire. Sarah drew a breath and smelled onion and leather thaw and butter and the faint metallic comfort of the urn. Booth 4 kept its quiet. The room kept its promise to itself. She set the ladle down just to feel the counter under her hand. Hard and true, she pressed her palms to the wood and remembered years of wiping this same grain clean with a rag, turning doubt into shine, and shine into another hour open. The deep animal thrum outside suddenly dropped another shade, settling into a held note. Not silence, something quieter than sound, the kind of stillness that listens. In that hush, the heater's click sounded too loud. A spoon set down on a saucer made a bright ping that seemed to travel the length of the counter and touch the bell like a fingertip. The network was holding its breath. Sarah felt the counter's edge against her wrists, friendly and definite. She felt the eyes of her men on the door without seeing their faces turn. She felt Jake's stillness sharpened by a hair, as if a compass needle had found something familiar and unwelcome. The storm had become only weather. The room had become a fort, somewhere out in the white. An engine she did not want to hear was choosing a place to park. She kept her hands flat on the wood and waited for the only sound not welcome in a storm. Engines outside held a single long note, and then lowered it. As if a choir had pressed 2 fingers to its own mouth, the room felt the change. Conversation thin. Spoons set down, made bright little pings that ran the length of the counter and tapped the bell like a fingernail. Heat kept its stubborn ground. Sarah kept her hands flat on the wood, feeling the friendly wear in the grain where years of worry had been rubbed into shine. A new engine found the lot, not a thrum, but a practiced purr, the kind that belongs to tires that have never learned mud. Headlights swung a clean arc past the window, white and exact, then cut. The bell gave one warning tremor, a breath taken and held. Jake lifted his head a fraction. Marcus's palm spread wider on the tabletop. as if promising the table it would stay. Danny froze with the coffee pot half-tipped and corrected the pour so the filter did not fold. The door opened on its latch. Cold stepped in and made napkins twitch. A man filled the threshold the way paper fills a folder. Charcoal overcoat, gloves the color of wet slate, a tie that refused to curl, shoes shining like they did not know snow. His hair had not learned wind. A dark leather briefcase hung from his hand. Square and sure. He did not stamp his boots. He did not look for the mat. He paused on dry wood, took in the room in a single orderly scan that started with the register and ended at Sarah. His eyes were the color of window glass at noon, clear and far. He lifted a smile the way a person lifts a lid to show contents without sharing them. "Good evening," he said. The words skated. The room did not answer. It adjusted. Jake, hinge and verb, shifted one step. So the man had to face a person before he faced the counter. Marcus did not stand. He did not need to. He became a wall by remembering how big he was. Pete folded his towel once more and let it hang from his hand like a soft flag. Carlos kept his stool exactly where it was, which happened to be between the stranger and the backs of the nearest booths. The woman with the thawed braid glanced at Sarah, and then kept her eyes on her soup. Sarah's mouth did not know whether to say welcome or we are closed. She dried her hands on the towel tucked at her waist and did neither. She waited. The man's smile climbed one polite knot. "Ms. Williams," he said, and the name pinned her to the wood more efficiently than a hand might. "My name is Lyle." He breathed on the last name, as if it were expensive. "Summit State Bank." He shifted the briefcase to his left hand, so the right could display credentials, an identification card in a clear sleeve, a logo she recognized from the letter's letterhead, a lanyard with plastic corners turned pale where it creased. He raised the badge only high enough that a person would have to step closer to read it. Jake did not step, he leaned a degree instead, and the degree did the reading. Marcus blinked the slow blink of a bull that has seen a red cloth and does not intend to move until he is ready. Lyle kept the smile. His gaze went over Jake's shoulder to the register. A small acknowledgement passed through his face at the sight of the drawer. He had the expression of a man who recognizes a layout drafted before he was born. He set his briefcase on the counter with the softness of habit and flipped the brass latches with 2 expert clicks. The sound was small and official. He opened the case and produced what paper produces when it wants to behave. Folders, a fixed stamp with a date wheel, a stack of forms that whispered as his gloved fingers squared them. "We attempted delivery this afternoon," he said. "Weather impeded." He lifted a manila envelope from the case and set it beside the napkin holder. The return window showed the same logo as his badge. A red strip across the flap glowed in the diner light. "Certified." Under it, a white label carried a number and a date. She did not pick it up. She saw enough to know what it wanted from her. His world printed evidence after it did the thing. Her world washed dishes while the water was hot. He slid a second sheet free. "Notice of intent to accelerate," he said, the words smooth with repetition, and a separate notice of right to cure. He set the second document directly over the white corner she had been guarding all night. As if covering a child's tooth with a blanket, he drew a flat metal stamp from the case, turned the rubber wheel with his thumb until the numbers aligned, and pressed it into the top right corner with a clean, wet punch. The sound made the room flinch. Ink shone and sank. Jake's hand rested palm down on the counter. His fingers did not splay. His voice did not lift. "Roads closed," he said, "because a person should not pretend the sky is blue when the sky is a white wall. Bank operations have contingencies. Lyle said, a sentence that had lived in his mouth a long time. He looked past Jake at Sarah again. We are here to establish record of personal service and to post a 10-day sticker in compliance with statute. He touched a second envelope with 2 fingertips and slid it forward as if offering salt. 10 days, Sarah said, and the words surprised her by arriving sound. You gave me 7. The smile widened generously. The 7 was a courtesy period. He nodded at the envelope. This is the formal timeline. Her hand knew the notch on the counter's edge where the laminate had chipped, and she had sanded it smooth. It found that notch now and held. Her chest did that tight belt thing and then loosened one hole because breath insisted. She did not look at the envelope. She looked at Jake's knuckles where they rested, pale from cold and steady from use. Lyle lifted his phone from his coat pocket, slim and polite. He held it level with his chest, and the shutter ticked with a pretty sound as it captured the counter, the register, the posted notice. He moved to angle the lens toward the door frame, where bare wood waited. No sticker, no date. He drew from the briefcase a square of bright vinyl, no bigger than a hand. He peeled its backing halfway down. Static lifted and clung to his glove. Marcus stood. The action was not loud. The chair made a small, respectful sound against tile and moved backward as if on its own. The radiator knocked once in agreement. Marcus did not change his face. He set his bulk between Lyle and the door, with the quiet certainty of a boulder remembering it had been riverbed before it learned to be dam. Sir, Lyle said, still kind. I need 12 seconds with the jam and a clean surface. Hinge is busy, Marcus said, voice low as winter rock. Come back when roads learn manners. Lyle weighed all of it. He set the phone down, facing Marcus. For a heartbeat the screen glowed, showing its own reflection in Marcus's impassive stare, a digital contract meeting a stone wall. The glow thinned and went dark. The room became a set of small decisions that added up to a barrier. Pete's towel did not move, and still managed to be in the way of trouble. Danny set the coffee pot down so the glass would not crack from heat it did not expect, and found himself nearer to Sarah without deciding to be. Carlos turned his stool a quarter turn, to give the woman with the braid a clean path if she wanted to rise. She did not. Lyle picked the phone up again, angled the lens toward Sarah and the paper, and the shutter readied itself for another neat sound. A hand came into the frame and covered the lens with a palm. Not a strike, a cover. Jake's hand was a good size, old scars risen pale across 2 knuckles, like lines under a map. Lyle did not flinch, but his eyes flickered. The first crack in his porcelain calm. The tidy little shutter did not speak again. Document the weather, Jake said, palm still gentle on glass. Document the highway notice about the pass. Document the fact that this room is open, coffee is hot, and a woman is doing her work, while your clock pretends the road is a hallway. Sarah watched the man in the coat and thought of his neat stamps, the pleasant clicks, the shoes that parted clean through snow. She realized, quiet as a confession to herself, that she was not afraid of him. She felt tired and angry and busy. Fear did not find a chair. Lyle set the phone down, face up on the briefcase, a short, deliberate inch from his documents. The screen stayed awake long enough for Sarah to see a line of words in the top banner, an email sliding in with her name and the address in it. Service confirmed. He kept the smile where he had set it, but she saw a drawer close behind it. He took out a form with a yellow tab and wrote on the top line, "Declined to sign." He wrote the time. He pressed the stamp to the corner. The wet ink made its small final sound. "We are done," he said, and then remembered manners. "I appreciate the coffee's existence. He closed the briefcase. The latches chimed once each like little bells that only ring for people who like bells. He slid a pen toward her with a little hopeful push. The pen had weight. It wanted a hand. Sarah looked at the line. She felt the counter under her palm. Hard and true. Her mind went not to the ghost of Robert in the corner, but to the new life in Danny's face, the careful pour he had learned, the way his hands had steadied. She did not sign. She reached instead for the ladle, a small, deliberate choice that meant she preferred work to worry. Broth caught the light. The dented rim tapped its tidy period again. Pete lifted the orphaned pen. He weighed it like a joke, then slid it into the sugar jar, a small sharp tomb for the bank's authority. Carlos exhaled, and the sound went around the booths like a fresh blanket. The woman with the braid looked at the jar and smiled into her soup as if sweet had been added to more than coffee. Lyle lifted the bright square of vinyl with 2 fingers and glanced at the doorframe. The way a man looks at a measure he intends to mark, he looked at Marcus instead. He put the sticker back in the case. He took 1 step backward, then another. The room kept its gravity. Danny lifted the pot again and remembered the slow pour. The radio thought about a hum and stayed respectful. Lyle reached for the handle. Jake did not move. The door opened a clean width and let the night put its hand inside. The engines outside seemed to lean closer, listening. He paused on the mat at last, looked down at the wet dark there as if the rubber offended him, and lifted his eyes to Sarah. 10 days? He said, not unkind. Then, almost a confession. Though the voice did not change enough to admit it, the bank does not like surprises. He nodded once, the movement the size of a blink. Ms. Williams, gentlemen. He put the hat he had not worn back on anyway and stepped out into white. The bell gave a single note that sounded like a stamp pulled from paper. The engines outside did not change their held tone. The taillights made 2 red coins in the snow and slid away toward a road that was not a road. For a long breath. The diner did not speak. The heater clicked. A spoon tapped twice. Sarah realized her fingers had not moved off the counter. The wood was warm under her hands in the way old things are warm, not with heat, but with memory. Jake lifted his palm from the phone and slid it back across the briefcase an inch. He did not watch it go. He turned his hand and, without touching Sarah, set his knuckles to the wood beside hers. A small neighboring of bone and oak. We lock it now, he said, as if there were a latch inside the words. She looked at him because the room was full of looking, and she needed 1 look to hold still. Lock what? His eyes moved to the register and back, then to the empty doorway. Lock him out, he said. The clock, the road, the next 10 days are ours. Sarah, Marcus's shin dipped once. A signature written with a neck. Pete let the towel ride his shoulder and squared the sugar jar, so the captive pen sat dead center like a warning. Carlos turned his stool back toward the room and grinned as if heat had leaned closer. Danny poured coffee with exactly the right speed and filled Sarah's mug without spilling a thread. She wrapped her fingers around it. Ceramic heat ran into bone. Outside, the engines climbed a hair back up their held note, as if to say we heard and we approve. The neon held its color. Booth 4 kept its quiet. The envelope sat under the notice with the wet stamp, time gleaming and then disappearing into fibers. The ladle tapped the rim. A neat period. The hinge held. The room exhaled. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt the bank's clock fall off her ribs like a coat she did not have to wear. Heat kept its stubborn ground, shouldering around boots and chair legs, while the engines outside settled into a long, patient hum that felt like a big animal lying down around the diner and breathing slow. Coffee breathed. Steam traced soft ghosts along stainless steel. The radio watched from its shelf with a small green eye, pleased with what it had called here and willing to rest a moment. Sarah wrapped both hands around her mug and let the ceramic write warmth into her bones. The counter's edge found its familiar place against her wrists. The envelope sat half-covered under the fresh notice, the wet ink already fading into the paper's grain. She felt its weight without touching it. More than that, she felt the weight of eyes that had turned from that corner and toward work. Jake stood where the cold met the warm and gave the hinge a man's steadiness. His voice came low, as if he were adjusting a valve. "We lock," he said. 10 days. He did not climb a chair or preach. He pointed with 2 fingers to the radio. Marcus, posts. Pete, mats and door. Carlos, lanes. Danny, count and coffee. Tommy, first thread. The words were short pieces of wood set under a heavy thing so it would not roll. They held first thread, Tommy said, grinning quick and sheepish, like a boy handed the front of the rope. He came to the window with Jake and cleared a new oval in the fog. Through it, the lot showed itself, bikes in tidy rows, pickups nose out, a plow tucked near the mouth of the drive like a dog at a gate. Tommy tapped the glass where the highway bent away into white. "West Bend," he said, then corrected himself with a shrug. "Men," he said, "not bodies. Men. They do not sleep," Jake answered. "They rest smart. Rotate on the hour. We set 3 rings. Lot. Turn off. Bend. Nobody gets surprised." He glanced at Sarah and let the edge of his voice soften. "Nobody comes through your door blind." Marcus was already moving. He laid his big hand flat on the register like a blessing, then lifted it and took the aisle like a quiet parade. He shrugged on his coat with the patience of a man who knows weight is part of warmth. He touched Danny with his chin. "You own inside lanes. Kid, pour steady. Eyes up, hear the door with your ears." He slung 2 towels over his shoulder like sashes, glanced through the glass the way a farmer reads sky, and stepped into the white without hurry, swallowed and still somehow visible because some people make their own weather. Pete studied the floor as if he could persuade the mats by reason not to slip. He set one and tested it with a heel, set another, and tucked its edge so Melt would have to change its mind. He straightened the bell with a thumb and drew a single round note from it, writing the sound into the wood. "Keep your manners," he told it, and the bell, being a bell, agreed. Carlos moved with the craft of a bouncer who had never needed his fists. He slid a stool 2 inches left and 3 inches back, and by doing so made a lane where there had been a knot. He set 2 chairs shoulder to shoulder and touched each back as if appointing them to a purpose. "This is the line," he said to the air. "In and out. Eat. Sit. Warm." The room listened and learned. Danny stood straight as a wire pulled true. He set mugs 4 to a row, handles left, because the coffee hand would need the easy lift. He measured grounds by weight in his palm instead of spoons, because he already knew the feel. He poured at the speed the filter liked, and looked up between pours the way a driver learns to glance at mirrors. When Sarah passed him the sugar jar, the captured pen flashed once in the light like a buried nail. He set the jar in its place, center and right, as if even the small symbol needed to be visible to keep doing its quiet work. The radio snapped into sharp usefulness. A voice came clean enough to pocket. "Breaker 1N, the bend is our. 2 lamps dug in, triangles set, shoulder scraped, 20-minute rotations. Over." A second voice laid its words beside the first like neat bricks. "Turn-off holds. 2 trucks hood to hood for windbreak. Coffee on. Over. Copy," Jake said, not into the mic, but in a tone that made the air behave. He looked at Tommy. "First thread. Tommy fished up a small notebook with a bar logo singed on the cover. He licked his thumb, found a clean page, and set a stub of pencil to the corner like a man squaring a room. Name, he said. Chapter. Arrive. Slot. He spoke it like a right, and no one laughed. Big Mike. Oakland. He murmured as a mountain in a black jacket drifted to the blind corner by the window. His pencil made a dry whisper. Outside, engines lifted half a step, as if the choir liked hearing itself organize. Jake reached behind the counter without asking, and brought up a clean dish ledger, the kind Sarah kept for true weeks and short ones. He set it by Tommy's grubby book, and drew a line down its center with his thumbnail. This is your board, he told her. Heads up. Cash in. Nothing loose. He did not push it toward her. He set a knuckle on the paper and left it there like a placeholder. When you say, she put her palm on the ledger, and it surprised her by fitting, no damp, no slip. She could have wept for that small, dry fact. She took the diner pen, cheap and true, and printed the date in the top right corner. The numbers looked right on the line. She wrote a heading, donations. She wrote another, expenses, start with start. Pete said, not looking up as he dabbed chair legs dry. Not with no, she nodded, and the nod felt like taking a job. She wrote coffee, and drew a neat box and crossed it once. She wrote bread, heat, salt. She did not write rent. She did not write bank. She would meet those words later with better hands. Boots passed through the door in a rhythm that made sense. A woman with a thawed braid touched the counter with 2 fingers, as if checking the pulse of the room, and took her bowl to the end seat where she could watch door and window both. A young man with a pale scar across one brow offered a tight roll of bills without apology or pride. Sarah nodded to the ledger. He looked at the page, at her hand, at Jake, and set the roll on the metal lip instead of pushing it toward the drawer. Tommy checked his name into his own book first, the pencil tapping a small mark, then slid the money under Sarah's palm for tally. Chain of hands, chain of custody. It felt clean. Outside, the West Bend found shape. 2 bikes nose out with a space between, triangles glowing, a plow idling only enough to keep memory warm. Men stood in threes with backs to wind. They talked as much as heat needs and no more. At the turnoff, 2 truck hoods made a wall and a little stove colored the air red. Someone set a can on it, and it sang. The radio stamped time as if with ink. 22:08. Vest. Bent. Lit. 22:12. Turn off coffee live. 22:17. Lane sanded. The digits said what the men were doing without telling stories about courage. Sarah watched the green eye work and felt a steadiness under her ribs that came from the idea of a world measured by people who love the doing more than the telling. Marcus came across the radio neck, his voice a bass line under the melody. South shoulder drifting, he said. Send 2. His breath fogged the transmitter, proof the sentence had weight. Send, Jake answered, and the word moved 2 men before it finished being sound. Pete found a bead of water fattening itself under the door, and stopped it with the corner of a towel, as neatly as a tailor tucks a seam. Sarah set 2 small marks under salt, and a longer one under coffee. Danny fitted a fresh filter with magician hand. The door opened for a pair exchanging posts, and his pour did not wobble, which was its own kind of learning. The pen in the sugar jar leaned for a blink, then stood straight again, as if it had remembered its spine. Tommy pulled a round tin from his jacket and twisted the lid. Inside lay paper tape with red lines and a black felt marker tethered to its cap like a boat key. Evidence, he said, grinning because work can be a pleasure. He tore a strip with an ugly sound and printed on it in neat block letters, the smell of alcohol waking the air. Donations. The date, his initials, a line for count. He centered the strip on a plain brown envelope and rubbed his thumb until the glue made a single skin. He slid Sarah the marker. Your turn. She uncapped it, and the tether tapped her finger. She wrote clearly, the way the first teacher of the first day had insisted, neatness saves time. She added the hour in words, and beneath it her name, and under that a small line for numbers she would not lie to. Tommy looked at the paper. Neatness saves time, he said, quoting her thought back to her with a lopsided smile. And truth saves everything else. He initialed the tape with a quick flick and set the envelope beneath the register lip, where the bank's letter had crouched all day. The motion felt like a trade the world would honor. Tommy's phone buzzed once in his pocket, a small private announcement. He spoke 5 words, no more. 2 towns. Now, confirm. He ended the call and traced the hour in the air with his pencil's tip without touching paper, as if saving the mark for the right page. Last light is lit, he told Jake. The thread is a rope now. The radio offered a quiet salute, not words, but a crisp breath. Outside, the choir of engines held its note. Inside, spoons ticked, towels softened, boots found their places, and the bell remembered it belonged to greetings, not to fear. The stamped notice still wore its time in the corner, gleaming a moment and sinking harmlessly into the fiber. Sarah let her spine rest against the counter. Booth 4 sat where it always had, a square of quiet in the edge of her sight. Her fingers found the tiny ridge on the coffee pot handle, the ghost grit where black tape had lived that first year when the handle had cracked. Robert had wrapped it tight and said it would hold until tomorrow, then kept it 2 winters because life goes like that. The tape was gone now, but the memory of its texture carried a promise. She pressed her thumb there, a private vow. Across the room, Jake's eyes noticed without intruding, and in the way his gaze softened, she understood he knew what kept her on her feet. Marcus stepped back in, snow epaulets melting off his shoulders in disciplined clumps. He shook once on the mat and shut the door with an elbow. First ring planted. Second ring holds. Third ring walking, he reported, voice low enough to warm the bottom of a cup. Truck from the west, tried for the driveway, and changed its mind when it met 24 lights. He hung a towel to dry and ate standing because rudeness was a language he did not speak. Sarah looked down at the ledger. Cash lay on the metal lip. Not push, simply set, as if the counter had become a small altar to plain dealing. She counted with her eyes and not her hands, because eyes do not crinkle bills or tell lies. She wrote the number with care. She wrote the hour. She signed. She slid the envelope to Tommy, who added his initials to the tape and passed it back. Chain. She did the math in her head and felt it settle like a map. Another 60,000 to go, 1 cup at a time. The thought did not scare her. It set a road in front of her feet. Jake stood at the hinge and let the quiet deepen. He looked at the open ledger, then at the sealed envelope with the red lines like a bandage that meant healing. Get the money, he said to the room, quiet as work. The clock is running for them now. The engines outside breathed as if to agree. The radio's green eye held steady. The coffee urn exhaled. Sarah pressed her thumb once more to the ghost of black tape on the handle and lifted the pot. The light stayed on. The diner held the line. And the night, for once, was only weather. Night stretched like a long hallway with quiet doors opening on the hour. Engines outside held a patient choir note. Inside, the diner moved the way a tired body moves when it understands pain and chooses work anyway. Coffee breathed. Steam wrote soft lines along steel. The radio's small green eye blinked and then steadied, content with the order it had helped gather. Sarah's ledger grew in tidy rows. The way winter lays rings you notice only later. She had written donations and expenses under donations. Bills arrived in small, honest stacks, each set gently on the metal lip, rather than shoved, as if the money were introducing itself. Under expenses she wrote heat and salt and bread, and then, after a breath, fuel, because the plow had its own hunger. Each time her pen marked a line, she felt the friendly grain of the counter under her wrist. The brown envelope with the red striped tape sat where the bank's letter had crouched all day. Its face carried the date, her name, and a clean line for count. Tommy had initialed the tape with his lopsided mark, Chain. He had said, grinning like a man blessed by work but not bragging over it. Marcus crossed the hinge in and out. Snow, epaulets, melting to drops that Pete caught before they thought of mischief. He ate only when Sarah told him to, and even then he stood at the door, a human door against the storm. Carlos tuned the room with 2 inches of stool and 1 chairback's angle. Danny poured at the pace the filter liked and looked up every third breath without being told. The way a driver learns the mirror, the radio kept time like a careful clerk. A voice would say the bend rotated. Then another would say sand on the east lip. Then lane clean to the mailboxes. Each call ended with over, but the room did not need the word to know the thought had finished. Sarah began writing the minutes along her ledger margin beside each donation, because truth likes company. Near the bottom of the first page, Tommy rapped his knuckles twice on the counter. The wood answered, and the air sat up. He slid the envelope into the middle like a plate at a picnic. Sarah checked the tape with the side of her hand, then looked at Jake. He nodded a small hinge of the head. Chain. She drew the hour in words with her pen. Not the number she wanted to hope for. She wrote nothing else for a breath, and listened to engines through the floor and the bell on its spring, and the room sound that happens when people help without needing their names, said. Then she peeled the flap back clean and opened the mouth. Cash lay in banded stacks, and in careful layers, where no band had been found except conscience. She counted with her eyes first, then with her fingers, crisp and flat, not licking her thumb because she believed money should not be asked to put itself in your mouth. 10s and 20s found one pile. 50s, another, with the odd confidence of good suits. Hundreds at the top because they belonged there and looked awkward anywhere else. Tommy called the numbers as she placed them, his pencil whispering along a column he had drawn on the back of a menu. Carlos watched the door without looking like it. Marcus watched Carlos. Pete watched the floor, and by watching the floor, he watched the whole room. Danny set a cup by Sarah's right elbow, at the exact moment she would have reached for it if her hands were free. She took a sip like receiving a small sacrament. When the stacks made their tidy shape, she rested her palm over them for a heartbeat. The way a baker touches rising dough, only to feel that it is alive and does not need help. She lifted her hand and wrote the sum in words. Not for show but for clarity. She printed the hour again. She signed. She passed the envelope to Tommy. He initialed across the tape, where the new line cut. He did not smile. He carried the envelope to Jake. Jake pressed his knuckles to the paper. Chain. He slid it back under Sarah's hand, as if returning to a tree the fruit it had grown, so the tree would know what it had done. She sealed it clean. Chain complete. The radio gave a short breath of approval. The engines outside climbed a hair and settled. The next hour came as honest hours do, suddenly and also exactly on time. Riders traded posts like vows. More bills found the metal lip. Sarah wrote their numbers with the same careful hand. The envelope received. The tape received initials. The seal closed. Chain. Fatigue crept under the door like a draft. Pete found it and tucked a towel into the seam, smoothing the corner with a father's thumb. The quiet pressed behind Sarah's eyes. The ache a day leaves when it asks more than it should and you answer anyway. She touched the ghost grit on the coffee pot handle, where Robert's black tape had lived that first year. The tape was gone, but the promise his hands made remained a rough memory under her thumb. She pressed there, a private vow. Across the room, Jake's gaze softened once, and she knew he saw the same shape and chose not to speak it. Pages turned. Lines grew, chain after chain. By the deep hour when even engines dream, the ledger carried 2 full pages, neat and unhurried. The envelope had been born and sealed again and again. Tommy tore a fresh strip of tape and printed the hour with the marker's clean smell. He slid Sarah the cap on its tether. She wrote the time in words, steady as breath, and left a space for the count she would not lie to. She did the math in her head the way a cook does in a rush. A glance and a certainty. The figure sat down on the page and did not wobble. She did not say it. She wrote it. She sealed. Chain. We are not racing dawn. Jake said so only she could hear. We are feeding it. The clock is theirs now. She nodded because she was living the truth of it. Outside, engines eased and lifted like lungs, seeking a better rhythm. Inside, the radio posted small stamps of time. East clear. Fuel checked. Lot quiet. The words laid a quilt over the room. Then a new voice came on air, deep and amused, like someone who rises before daybreak to catch it coming. The voice said they were rolling from the west, snowlight in the east, and that they had brought what was asked. Tommy's phone buzzed once, a private thunder. He spoke 5 words to the quiet air. 2 towns, now. Confirm. He looked to Jake. Last light is lit, he said. The thread is a rope now. Jake did not smile. He touched the pen in the sugar jar with one finger, checking that the little flag was still planted. He looked at the ledger, then at the sealed envelope with red lines like healed cuts. He tipped his head toward the landline. Call, he said. Sarah glanced at the wall clock, because people who have lived by time cannot help honoring it. She wiped her fingers dry, lifted the beige handset with its honest cord, and pressed the bank number from the notice. The digits already seated in her mind. An automated voice thanked her for calling and offered a map of numbers. She pressed for a person. The operator answered in a calm she recognized from buildings with carpeted halls. Sarah said her name, the diner, the parcel. And then she used the language of work rather than pleading. This is Sarah Williams of the Midnight Haven Diner on Highway 70, she said. As of just past 5:15 in the morning Mountain Time, we hold in hand more than 50,000 toward the cure you demanded in the notice delivered tonight. Chain of custody is sealed and initialed by multiple parties. Photographs of the ledger and of the envelopes with clear timestamps will be provided on request. We require a hold and written acknowledgement that partial cure has been received and recorded. The line clicked into a different calm. One moment, said the voice. A second voice arrived, precise and dry. It asked for name, address, reference, then asked again because that is what precision does. Sarah repeated without sighing. The voice said they were outside business hours, and that a collections mailbox would record the notice. Sarah spoke before the tone had finished, because she did not need it to tell her she was ready. She restated her name, the place, the account reference in measured words. She repeated the amount on hand, the hour, the chain of custody, the photographs, the request for a freeze pending full cure within 10 days. She ended with this call is recorded and metadata will be preserved. Thank you. She pressed the handset down and listened for the neat click, a sound like a stamp meeting paper. She wrote the time in the ledger margin and underlined it once, then again. Not from superstition, but from order. Tommy lifted his phone, framed the ledger, so the wall clock and the radio eye rode into view, and took a picture. He photographed the envelope and the tape and the initials, the little line on the screen stamped today and the hour. He showed Sarah. She nodded, blessing the notion of metadata with her older word for proof. Engines outside climbed and held. The radio told them light was coming and then kept silent to make room for it. Gray shouldered into the lot and separated chrome from snow. The sign found its red and kept it. New stacks arrived and laid themselves on the lip with the same quiet insistence. Utah had kept its promise. Sarah counted. Tommy called. Jake watched the hinge like a shepherd who counts sheep and fences both. Pete checked the bell so its voice would not crack. Carlos pinned Jake's short list to the cooler with a magnet the way you pin a prayer you intend to fetch later. Marcus took 3 bites and went back into the white that had started letting blue through. Sarah sealed the envelope with a last clean line of tape. She wrote the sum in words that made the nib pause, a number that would read clearly to any eyes later. 68,000. She wrote the hour. She signed. She slid to Tommy. He initialed. He passed to Jake. Jake pressed his knuckles to the paper. Chain. He set the envelope back beneath Sarah's palm as if giving the tree its own fruit to admire. The landline rang once, a polite sound from a surprised throat. Sarah lifted the handset. The precise voice returned, a shade warmer. Your voicemail has been received and logged, just past 5:15 Mountain Time. It said, your stated amount is noted. We have recorded your request for a temporary freeze on further action and will annotate accordingly. A receipt is being emailed. Please continue through this line. Sarah looked at Jake because she wanted one other person to hold the moment. He nodded once. Hinge true. Record this time, she said. The voice said, recorded. The neat click closed the call. She wrote the hour in the ledger. Boxed. Both times. And the box felt less like a banner than a fence around a small bright field she could plant from now on. Dawn lifted its shoulder over the pass and pushed light into the room. Faces caught it. Chrome woke. The bell breathed. The engines kept their patience. The notice with its stamp sat like a word in a story whose ending had been quietly rewritten. Sarah let her hand find the ghost grit on the coffee pot handle once more, and then lifted away. She wrapped her fingers around her own mug and felt heat settle into bone. She looked at the ledger, at the plain, honest numbers. Booth 4 sat where it always had, and this time did not pull. It held. Jake stood at the hinge. The room looked his way by quieting. He did not repeat himself. He lifted his mug and touched the doorframe with his knuckles, the way you touch a friend when there is no clever thing to add. Engines answered by holding their note. The radio stayed polite. The clock ticked once and did not matter. Sarah breathed. The diner held the line. Morning, finally, belonged to them. And the road, she thought, belonged to the travelers who kept their promises. Morning took the room without asking permission, the way good news finally finds where to land. Light pressed its palms to the windows and made the chrome outside blink awake. The engines settled into a satisfied idle, and then, one by one, quieted, as if the night's big animal had curled itself tighter to rest. Heat kept its small ground around stools and chair legs. Coffee breathed. The radio's green eye watched like a content cat. Sarah stood at the counter with the ledger open and the envelope resting under her palm, the tape's red stripes lying flat as healed skin. The wall clock meant nothing cruel now. Bone-tired and buoyed at once, she felt the honest weight of work and the lift of it together. Booth 4 sat where it always had, a square of quiet that, for the first time in a long time, did not pull her toward loss. It held simple as a chair. Jake kept the hinge, shoulder near the frame. A person becoming part of the building by use. Marcus stood a pace back, bowl empty, spoon upright like a little flag that had served. Pete eased the mats into perfect seams as if making promises to the floor. Carlos slid the short list beneath a magnet and added a neat check beside fuel. Danny wiped the urn spout and settled the valve a quarter turn back from tight. A habit learned in a single night that would follow him into whatever life came next. The landline clicked its small throat, and the old fax murmured from its shelf. A warm strip of paper crept out and lay across itself like a snake sunning on a rock. Tommy caught it by the edge so it would not smudge. He flattened it against the counter with the back of his hand. The header showed the bank's address and the hour stamped in surprised numerals. Subject line, cure pending. Hold acknowledged, dry as crackers and tasting like victory, all the same. Sarah read it the way a careful cook checks for eggshell. Eyes skimming, fingers steady, relief rose. But she did not let it run ahead of order. She set the printout beside the ledger and wrote the time in the margin, then drew a square around her note to give the moment a fence. Underline once, then again. Not to beg luck, but to tell truth where to stand. Jake touched the paper's corner with one knuckle. The gentleness of a man who knows when a thing should not be jostled. He looked at Sarah without asking or instructing, only letting his eyes say, "We saw the same shape and named it right." She nodded. Her hand found the tiny ridge on the coffee pot handle where black tape had once lived. The ghost grit met her thumb like an old friend. She pressed there, a private vow, and lifted. Breakfast did not announce itself. It simply started. Bread met the flat top and chose to be toast. Eggs, more theory than inventory, still found a pan. Butter gave its low applause against heat. Onion, coffee, thawed, leather. All these smells folded into something closer to home than to weather. The woman with the braid moved plates with the quiet economy of a sister. Big Mike took up a tray in hands better suited to tires and did not fumble it. Marcus stood where a second door might have been in a larger place, and became that door by standing. Tommy tore a short piece from the red striped tape and fixed it to the bank receipt's edge. He wrote the date and his initials, and made a small place for Sarah's signature. He held out the marker, cap tapping his finger. She signed with the care of a first lesson done right. He smiled at the paper without disrespect, and tucked it under the lip of the counter where the other letter's white corner had once waited. The trade felt clean. The radio roused itself and offered a short, useful sentence. The bend reported light traffic eastbound. The plow lifted its blade and nodded. Hands warmed and the world felt less sharp. The turnoff asked for more coffee and did not need to say please. Danny looked at the urn and moved already. A boy whose hands had learned timing he did not know he had. Pete tuned the bell so its mouth would not chatter when the day took it. Turning a little screw with a coin, he rang it once on purpose. The note went round the room and sat down in the wood. "Keep your manners," he told it. The bell, being a bell, agreed. Carlos wiped the cooler handle and slid a sticky note beneath the magnet. In his blocky hand, he drew a tidy box and wrote the word tomorrow with an arrow beneath it. It was the kind of mark you make only when you believe a place will still be standing to see it. Sarah's chest remembered how to expand on the inhale without counting cost. Big Mike set plates at booth 4 without claiming the seat. He backed away generous as a man who understands a room's myth and knows better than to stand on it. Gratitude moved across Sarah's teeth like a twinge and turned warm. Outside, tires rolled. Not many and not hungry. The plow idled near the mouth of the drive like a loyal dog Chrome winked in shy sun. The storm had fallen back into weather. Lyle did not return. His absence became a shape of its own, a sticker never pressed to a jam. In its place, Marcus slipped the bank's receipt into a clear sleeve from a napkin pack and taped it inside the glass where every entering eye would find it. Morning light washed through the paper until its black lines looked like truth instead of script. Pete smoothed the tape edges with his palm, the way you smooth a wrinkle from a shirt you intend to wear to something important. Outside line is set for daylight rotation, Jake said, voice lower, now that there was nothing left to fight. But the day, if the pass opens mid-morning, we can release the lane. Sarah glanced from clock to radio to ledger, the order her mind loved. We keep coffee through, she said. We keep heat. We feed whoever walks in. It was not brave or grand. It was policy. We keep a runner for the deposit when the lobby lights up, Tommy added, nodding at the envelope as if it had ears. We trust the chain, Sarah said, and the chain trusts us. Danny placed a plate in front of her without saying her name. She ate standing, 2 bites into her own breakfast, before she remembered how to taste. Salt and butter and relief, and something else returned to her tongue. An old friend who knew the way home. A pickup from town nosed in careful as a man who has driven this road since gravel. The driver pulled off his hat like a parishioner and asked if they were open in a voice that already knew. Sarah turned the sign from the inside with the small completeness of a coin flip. Open took its place against the glass like it had been waiting backstage all along. Work came in like a tide that understands shorelines. A couple in heavy coats warmed their hands and said thanks to the room instead of picking a face. A trucker with salt braided into his beard read the bank receipt without turning his head. He put down the price of breakfast and then a little fortune besides, and did not wait for the tray of coin. Sarah wrote the amount and marked the page with a private sign she would understand later. Marcus smiled with one corner and returned to the hinge. Near mid-morning, the radio carried the tired cadence of a patrol unit. The pass would open 1 lane westbound on the hour. Chains advised. Tow work still ongoing. The room did not cheer. It adjusted. Jake said they would rotate off in 10s and clear as the road cleared, leaving no hole behind them. You will eat before you go, Sarah told them, ridiculous and right. Jake did not argue. Marcus took down names as if a classroom had suddenly learned manners. Pete filled the sugar jar and left the pen inside. A quiet reminder planted in sweetness. The hour arrived like a soft bell rung somewhere beyond the ridge. Jake lifted 2 fingers at the radio, and engines outside answered with a low line of sound. Not revving, simply alive. Tommy took up the envelope with both hands. Grin for once restrained. Runner, he said. Take Pete, Sarah answered. Take the plow, if the road demands it. Carry a page from the ledger, should a clerk need to see truth with his own eyes. Pete buttoned his coat to the throat and nodded. We will be back before the coffee knows to turn bitter, he said. It will not turn bitter, Danny answered, offended on behalf of the urn. The room's laugh rose without noise. Then with it, Jake touched his knuckles to the doorframe in farewell, not an oath, a neighborly gesture. He watched the plow swing wide, the envelope ride careful in Tommy's lap, the line of bikes and trucks take the road without hurry. Engines woke in polite sequence. Chrome winked. The sound was not a roar, but a long, purposeful exhale. Tracks marked the snow behind them, a temporary map of loyalty that the first wind would blur and that memory would keep better than any camera. Inside, work remained work. Eggs and toast and checks, written with the flat end of a pen on pads that remembered warmer summers. The ledger waited for the return, a clean space left on purpose. Sarah flipped back a page to the neat little squares she had drawn around the dawn calls. Her thumb found the ghost grit on the pot handle, now less wound than anchor. The woman with the braid came up with a rag and spoke in a sister's tone. "You are going to sleep when this is through." It was not a question. Sarah looked at the clock and allowed herself to imagine a nap that would not feel like surrender. She nodded. Danny tapped the ledger lightly with a fingernail. "You will sign the bottom when the deposit comes back," he said, careful and sure, as if he had done this for years. In a life he had not yet known he could have. The bell rang with its new manners. A man from town stepped in with a folded permit stamped yesterday, a temporary parking expansion. No one had needed until the night had taught the town how big a heart can be. He placed it on the counter without drama. "If you need it," he said, and left the sentence open like a door. Sarah slid the page beneath the magnet beside the list. The push of a neighbor's hand on a nail, the plow returned before the coffee even considered bitterness. Tommy held up a receipt like a boy bringing bread. Pete followed, hair dusted with fine sparkles. The stamped slip passed into Sarah's hand. Bank seal heavy, time precise. The figures copied themselves in her neat script. The pen did not tremble. Tommy initialed the tape on a fresh envelope for petty cash, without being told. Habit, newly made, already felt old enough to trust. "Deposit made," Tommy said. "Time marked." Clerk smiled with all his teeth. Might be kin to families that love fry bread. The room's laugh had sound this time, and set something down gentle. Jake walked to booth 4, not to sit, but to set 3 fingers on the table's edge in a small salute to whatever had been held there before any of them. He returned to the hinge and found Sarah. He made a statement with his eyes and then with words. "Because some truths deserve both. We are not gone," he said. "We are simply rolling. If the weather turns mean again, call. We will answer faster for family." She knew she would not need to call often. She knew the road itself had become a line back to this door. She set her palm flat on the counter and felt the grain answer, friendly and true. The bank sticker had never arrived. In its place, the bank's own receipt stood clear as day, truer than any vinyl square. The sun laid a tidy warmth on the paper, a small signature in light. She noticed the total on the slip wore a clean type, the kind of numbers that knew their place now. Jake lifted his mug and touched the doorframe, then stepped into the morning. Engines gathered themselves, rose, and went, not in fury but in purpose. They left handwriting across the snow, tidy and legible. A script the pass could read without argument. The last headlight turned the bend. Silence did not rush in. It walked. The radio breathed and settled. The bell dozed. The room found its original size and did not feel small. Sarah stood at the counter with the ledger open and the deposit receipt tucked where it belonged. She drew one more line beneath the morning's page and let the pen rest. She looked at the clock, then at the fresh margin atop the next leaf, and wrote 2 words neat and steady. Day 1. She pressed her thumb once more to the ghost grit on the handle and poured. She was ready for the next 10 days, and whatever road they brought, just as signs in cold ink, she thought, but family is written in the steam. At its heart, Midnight Haven is a story about reclaiming dignity in a world that often measures worth by numbers, not character. Sarah's fight was never just about saving a diner. It was about remembering that fairness doesn't come from systems or signatures, but from people who choose to stand up when silence would be easier. Each cup of coffee, every quiet act of loyalty, became proof that kindness and integrity can outlast the cold machinery of power. The lesson runs deeper than debt or survival. It speaks to anyone who has ever been cornered by injustice or worn down by circumstance. Sometimes the fight isn't loud. Sometimes it's in keeping the doors open one more day. or in saying no when the world expects surrender. It's about knowing when to ask for help and when to become your own advocate. In a way, Sarah's story reminds us that true strength doesn't come from conquering others. It comes from rebuilding yourself, from believing that real gold doesn't fear the fire. As we age, we learn that fairness isn't guaranteed, but integrity is always a choice. Every small act of courage, every refusal to yield to cruelty, leaves a mark far greater than fear. If Sarah's story moved you, I'd love to hear your reflections. Have you ever stood your ground when the odds seemed impossible? Share your story in the comments, or tell me what this ending meant to you. Don't forget to like this video if it spoke to your heart, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories of resilience and redemption. May your own mornings arrive warm and unhurried, like sunlight over snow, and may you always find the strength to keep your own light burning. No matter how long the night,